The dust of Bitter Creek hadn't even settled before the cruel whispers began. They called Abigail a cursed woman, a dried-up riverbed of a wife. But when a desperate, grieving rancher with 5 wild children rode into town, he wasn't looking for a biological miracle. He was looking for a fighter. In the unforgiving expanse of the Wyoming Territory in 1883, a woman's worth was measured by 2 things: her ability to endure the harsh winters and her ability to bear children. Abigail Lawson had survived the blizzards, but she had failed the latter. At 28, Abigail was already considered a discarded relic. Her first husband, Josiah Miller, had paraded her from doctor to doctor in Cheyenne before finally, mercilessly casting her aside. "She's hollow," Josiah had told the town loudly enough for Abigail to hear from the boardwalk. "A dead field that won't take seed." The annulment had been swift, leaving Abigail with nothing but her maiden name and a heavy cloak of public shame. She took a job keeping the books and stocking shelves at Miller and Sons Mercantile, ironically owned by her ex-father-in-law, who kept her on out of a begrudging, humiliating pity. Every day, Abigail watched the women of Bitter Creek parade past her counter, their bellies swollen with life, their hands clutching the sticky fingers of toddlers. She learned to plaster a polite smile on her face, burying the deep, agonizing ache in her chest beneath ledgers and inventory lists. On the outskirts of town lay the Broken Spur Ranch, owned by Wyatt Cassidy. Wyatt was a man carved from the rugged Wyoming landscape itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a bruised thundercloud and hands calloused from years of wrangling cattle and fighting the earth. But Wyatt was a man drowning in a different kind of sorrow. 2 years ago, a virulent prairie fever had swept through the territory, taking his beloved wife, Mary Ann, and leaving Wyatt alone with 5 children: 14-year-old Caleb, 12-year-old Sarah, 9-year-old Ben, and 4-year-old twins, Daisy and Sadie. Without a mother's touch, the Cassidy household had descended into pure, untamed chaos. Wyatt worked from sunup to sundown just to keep the bank from seizing his land, leaving the children to raise themselves. Caleb was angry and prone to fistfights. Sarah had stopped speaking entirely. Ben was a reckless terror, and the twins were wild as unweaned calves. The turning point came on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. The Bitter Creek Town Council, led by the perpetually sour-faced Mayor Archibald Higgins and the town's chief busybody, Mrs. Henrietta Gable, summoned Wyatt to the town hall. "It's a disgrace, Mr. Cassidy," Henrietta sneered, her powdered face pinching in disdain. "Your boys are stealing apples, your girls look like street urchins, and little Sarah hasn't attended school in months. Judge Hiram Croft rides through here in 3 weeks. We are submitting a formal petition to have the children removed and placed in the Cheyenne orphanage. You are an unfit father." The threat struck Wyatt harder than a physical blow. The thought of his children, Mary Ann's children, being loaded onto a train and scattered to strangers terrified him. "They belong with me," Wyatt growled, his jaw ticking. "They need a mother," Mayor Higgins countered coldly. "If you cannot provide them with a respectable 2-parent home, by the time the judge arrives, the county will intervene." Desperate, furious, and out of time, Wyatt stormed out of the town hall. He needed supplies before he rode back to the ranch, so he pushed open the heavy oak doors of the mercantile. He found Abigail Lawson standing behind the counter, a ledger open before her. Before Wyatt could even speak, a loud crash echoed from the back aisle. Little Ben Cassidy had knocked over a towering display of mason jars while trying to reach a jar of peppermint sticks. Glass shattered everywhere. Wyatt cursed under his breath, exhausted. "Ben, I swear to the Almighty." But Abigail didn't shout. She didn't scold. She moved swiftly from behind the counter, her skirts rustling. "Don't move, sweetheart," she said, her voice a calm, commanding anchor in the chaos. She knelt right into the mess of shattered glass, ignoring the shards that bit into her apron. Gently, she lifted the terrified 9-year-old out of the danger zone, checking his boots and hands for cuts. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Ben whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "It's just glass, Ben," Abigail said softly, brushing a lock of dirt-caked hair from his forehead. "Glass breaks. Boys shouldn't. Are you hurt?" Wyatt stood frozen, watching the exchange. He had seen the way the town women looked at his children, with pity, disgust, or fear. But Abigail looked at Ben as if he were the most precious thing in the world. He knew the rumors about her. Everyone in Bitter Creek knew Abigail Lawson was barren. But as Wyatt watched her sweep up the glass, humming a soft tune to calm the boy, a wild, desperate idea took root in his mind. "Miss Lawson," Wyatt said, his voice rough. Abigail looked up, her striking green eyes meeting his. "Yes, Mr. Cassidy. What time do you finish your shift?" They met that evening on the porch of the town's boarding house. The Wyoming wind howled around them, a chilling reminder of the coming winter. Wyatt didn't mince words. He explained the ultimatum delivered by Mayor Higgins and the impending arrival of Judge Croft. "I need a wife," Wyatt said flatly, staring out into the darkening street. "And, from what I gather, you need a way out from under Josiah Miller's shadow. I can offer you a home, respect, and my name. It won't be a romantic life, Abigail. It'll be hard work. But I promise I will never raise a hand to you, and I will provide for you." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the rugged cowboy, seeing the profound exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. She wanted a family more than she wanted air in her lungs, but she knew the harsh reality of her own body. She lifted her chin, refusing to let him be deceived. "Mr. Cassidy, I am deeply flattered, but you must know the truth. The town makes sure everyone knows. I am barren. I cannot give you children." Wyatt turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her shiver. "I've got 5 children, Miss Lawson," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't need a breeder. I need a mother for the ones I've got, and a partner to help me hold my family together. I saw the way you looked at my boy today. You have a mother's heart. That's all that matters to me." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes. For the first time in her life, her inability to bear a child wasn't a curse. It was entirely irrelevant to the man standing before her. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll marry you." The news of their impending nuptials hit Bitter Creek like a lightning strike. The town square buzzed with vicious gossip. Henrietta Gable cornered Wyatt outside the blacksmith's forge 2 days before the wedding. "You are making a grave mistake, Wyatt Cassidy," Henrietta warned, her eyes narrowed. "She can't have children. A dead tree bears no fruit. She'll dry up your home just as she dried up her first marriage. The judge will see right through this pathetic sham." Wyatt stepped into Henrietta's personal space, his towering frame casting a long, dark shadow over the busybody. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice dangerously low, "if I hear you, or anyone else in this town, speak a single disrespectful word about my future wife again, you'll find out just how uncivilized I can be. Do we understand each other?" Henrietta swallowed hard and scurried away. They were married on a crisp Friday morning by Reverend Carter in a quiet 5-minute ceremony. Abigail wore a simple blue dress. Wyatt wore his only clean suit. There was no grand reception, no joyous celebration. They simply loaded her small trunk into the back of his wagon and rode out to the Broken Spur. If Abigail thought surviving the town's judgment was difficult, it was nothing compared to the reality of her new home. The ranch house was a disaster. Dust coated every surface, laundry was piled high, and a lingering scent of burned food hung in the air. But the true challenge was the children. 14-year-old Caleb stood on the porch, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes burning with resentment. "You aren't my ma," he spat the moment Abigail stepped off the wagon, "and we don't need you here." "Caleb, that's enough," Wyatt warned harshly. "No, it's fine," Abigail intervened, holding up a hand. She looked directly at the angry teenager. "You're absolutely right, Caleb. I'm not your mother. Your mother was Mary Ann, and from what your father tells me, she was a wonderful woman. I could never replace her, and I will never try. But I am the woman who is going to make sure you don't get sent to an orphanage in Cheyenne. So, for now, we're going to have to figure out how to tolerate each other." Caleb blinked, clearly thrown off by her lack of fragility. He scoffed and stormed off toward the barn. The first month was a grueling test of endurance. Abigail woke at dawn, scrubbing floors, mending torn trousers, and teaching herself how to cook over a massive iron stove. She sat with 12-year-old Sarah for hours, brushing the girl's matted hair and speaking softly, even though Sarah still refused to utter a single word. She chased the twins through the mud and kept Ben out of the cattle pens. Wyatt watched her from afar, amazed by her relentless fortitude. They shared a bed, but there was a physical distance between them, a silent agreement to keep their arrangement purely practical until they found their footing. Yet, in the quiet moments of the night, when their hands accidentally brushed beneath the quilt, a sudden electric tension would flare between them. The real turning point came during the first blizzard of the season. Wyatt had ridden out to the far ridge to rescue a stranded calf, leaving Abigail alone with the children. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, rattling the glass panes. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Caleb stumbled inside, his face pale, clutching his left arm. Blood was soaking through his thick wool coat, dripping rapidly onto the floorboards. He had been trying to fix a broken fence line and had slipped, tearing his arm open on rusted barbed wire and a jagged fence post. "Abby!" Caleb cried out, the first time he hadn't called her ma'am or you. Abigail didn't panic. Her maternal instincts, suppressed for so long, roared to life. "Sarah, get me clean towels and boiling water. Ben, fetch my sewing kit from the bedroom, now." She guided Caleb to the kitchen table, stripping away his coat to reveal a deep, ugly gash. The boy was shivering violently from the cold and shock. "It hurts," Caleb sobbed, his tough exterior shattering. "Am I going to lose my arm?" "You are not losing your arm, Caleb Cassidy, not on my watch," Abigail said fiercely. She poured whiskey over the wound, ignoring his scream, and then threaded a needle. "Look at me, Caleb. Keep your eyes on me." For the next hour, Abigail worked with steady, blood-stained hands, stitching the boy's flesh back together while talking him through the pain, telling him stories of her own childhood to keep him distracted. When Wyatt finally burst through the door, covered in snow, he stopped dead in his tracks. The kitchen looked like a battlefield, but Caleb was resting comfortably on the sofa, his arm neatly bandaged, drinking a cup of warm broth. Abigail was sitting beside him, gently stroking his hair. Wyatt met Abigail's eyes across the dim room. In that singular moment, the walls of their business arrangement crumbled into dust. He saw the fierce, undeniable love she already harbored for a child that wasn't of her blood. He realized that the town of Bitter Creek was full of fools. Abigail wasn't barren. She was overflowing with life. Wyatt walked over, kneeling beside the sofa. He reached out, not to touch his son, but to take Abigail's bloodied hand in his own. He pressed a long, tender kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you," Wyatt whispered, his voice cracking. Abigail smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. But their hard-won peace was fragile. Judge Croft was due to arrive in 3 days to inspect the household, and unbeknownst to Wyatt and Abigail, Henrietta Gable and the mayor had already hatched a treacherous plan to ensure the Cassidy family would be torn apart once and for all. The fragile harmony within the Cassidy cabin was an affront to the bitter gossips of town. Mayor Archibald Higgins and Mrs. Henrietta Gable had already written to the orphanage in Cheyenne, promising the immediate arrival of 5 healthy children. They had also quietly promised the lucrative Broken Spur grazing rights to a neighboring cattle baron once Wyatt Cassidy was broken and forced to sell. Abigail's unexpected competence was ruining their profitable scheme. They needed a catastrophe, and they needed it before Judge Hiram Croft struck his gavel. The night before the judge's scheduled inspection, the Wyoming sky was pitch black, choked with thick, bruised clouds. Under the cover of darkness, Mayor Higgins paid a drifter named Billy Jenkins $20, a small fortune, to ride out to the north ridge of the Broken Spur. Armed with heavy iron snips, Billy cut through 3 miles of Wyatt's barbed wire, driving the Cassidys' prized herd of breeding heifers out toward the treacherous ravines of Dead Man's Draw. When dawn broke over the frost-bitten plains, Wyatt stepped onto his porch and felt the blood drain from his face. The distant grazing valley was entirely empty. Caleb came running from the barn, his stitched arm clutched against his chest. "Pa, the north fence is wide open. The wire's been cut clean through." Wyatt's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. He knew exactly what had happened. If he didn't retrieve those heifers before they wandered over the steep limestone cliffs, the bank would foreclose on the ranch by the end of the month. But if he left, he wouldn't be here for Judge Croft's arrival. It was a vicious, perfectly executed trap. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She took one look at Wyatt's agonized face and the empty pasture, and she understood. "Saddle your horse, Wyatt," she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "Take Caleb with you. He can ride with one good arm, and you'll need him to flank the herd." "Abby, I can't leave you," Wyatt choked out, his chest heaving with panic. "The judge is supposed to be here at noon. Higgins will tear you apart." Abigail walked down the wooden steps and grabbed Wyatt by the lapels of his heavy canvas jacket. She looked up into his stormy eyes, her own burning with a fierce, protective fire. "Let them try. You go save our livelihood, Wyatt Cassidy. I will save our family. Do you trust me?" Wyatt looked down at the woman who had transformed his chaotic, grieving house into a home in less than a month. He swallowed hard, nodded, and pressed a hard, desperate kiss to her forehead. "I trust you with my life." By 8 o'clock, Wyatt and Caleb were galloping toward Dead Man's Draw. By 9 o'clock, a full 3 hours earlier than scheduled, a sleek black carriage rolled into the dusty yard of the Broken Spur. Abigail watched through the kitchen window as Mayor Higgins stepped down, his pocket watch gleaming on his portly stomach. He was followed by Henrietta Gable, who wore a smug, venomous smile, and finally, Judge Hiram Croft. The judge was a towering, imposing man with a thick silver beard, a long black coat, and eyes that had seen every lie the western frontier had to offer. They had intentionally arrived early, hoping to catch the Cassidy home in a state of filthy, unsupervised disarray. Abigail took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and opened the front door before they could even knock. "Good morning, Mayor Higgins, Mrs. Gable," Abigail said pleasantly, her manners flawless. She turned her green eyes to the looming magistrate. "You must be Judge Croft. Welcome to the Broken Spur. Please come in out of the wind. I have fresh sourdough bread and hot chicory coffee waiting for you." Higgins's smile faltered. Henrietta sniffed the air, clearly disappointed to find it smelling of roasted apples and cinnamon rather than unwashed laundry. They stepped into the cabin. The hardwood floors were scrubbed spotless. A warm fire crackled in the hearth. Ben was sitting at the table, quietly practicing his handwriting on a slate, while the twins, Daisy and Sadie, were neatly dressed in matching gingham pinafores, stacking wooden blocks on the rug. Judge Croft removed his hat, his sharp eyes taking in the tranquil scene. "Mrs. Cassidy," he greeted in a deep baritone, "I apologize for the early intrusion. We found ourselves ahead of schedule." "Not an intrusion at all, Your Honor." Abigail smiled, gesturing to the dining table. "Please, sit." Higgins scowled, looking around for the man of the house. "Where is Wyatt?" "Out drinking, I presume? Leaving you to wrangle these wild animals alone?" "My husband is out securing our northern herd, Mayor," Abigail replied, pouring steaming coffee into porcelain cups. "A section of our fence was mysteriously cut in the night. He is doing what a good father does, ensuring his family's financial security." Henrietta Gable slammed her hands onto the table, unable to contain her malice. "Don't listen to her lies, Judge. This woman is playing house. She isn't a real mother. She can't even be one." Henrietta reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper, slamming it down next to the coffee pot. "What is this, Mrs. Gable?" Judge Croft asked, his brow furrowing. "An affidavit from her former husband, Josiah Miller," Henrietta proclaimed triumphantly. "Signed by Dr. Abernathy in Cheyenne. It states that Abigail Lawson suffers from hysteria of the barren womb. She is biologically defective, prone to fits of madness, and entirely unfit to raise children. She was discarded by her first husband for a reason. Wyatt Cassidy only married her to trick this court." The room fell deathly silent. Abigail stared at the paper. The cruelty of Josiah Miller reaching out from her past felt like a knife twisting in her ribs. She felt the sudden, terrifying urge to weep, to run out into the prairie and hide from the humiliation. But then she looked at Ben, who had stopped writing, his eyes wide with fear. She looked at the twins who had frozen on the rug. They were watching her, waiting to see if she would break, waiting to see if they were about to be abandoned once again. Abigail straightened her spine. The iron in her soul, forged by years of silent suffering, snapped into place. "It is true," Abigail said, her voice ringing out clearly in the quiet cabin. She looked directly at Judge Croft. "I cannot bear children of my own, Your Honor. The medical diagnosis of hysteria was a convenient lie purchased by a cruel man to secure an annulment. But my barrenness is a fact. I have never hidden it." Henrietta gasped in mock horror. "You see, Judge, she admits it. She is an empty vessel." "But I am not empty," Abigail continued, her voice rising, vibrating with a fierce maternal wrath. "I wake up at dawn to feed these children. I sit up at night when the fevers come. I stitched Caleb's arm when he was bleeding. I wipe their tears, I wash their clothes, and I love them with every breath in my body. Biology does not make a mother, Mrs. Gable. Devotion does." "Preposterous," Higgins scoffed. "These children don't even respect you. The girl hasn't spoken a word in 2 years. They are traumatized by this sham of a marriage." Suddenly, a small, scraping sound echoed through the room. 12-year-old Sarah, who had been hiding in the shadow of the hallway, stepped into the light. Her face was pale, her small hands balled into tight fists at her sides. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she was standing directly in front of Henrietta Gable's chair. Sarah looked at the cruel woman, took a deep, shuddering breath, and opened her mouth. "You are a wicked, ugly woman." Sarah's voice cracked, raspy and raw from years of disuse, but loud enough to rattle the windows. "Don't you ever speak to my mother that way again. Get out of our house." Henrietta recoiled as if she had been slapped. Mayor Higgins' jaw dropped in sheer disbelief. Abigail slapped a hand over her mouth, tears finally spilling over her lashes as she stared at the little girl who had just claimed her. Judge Hiram Croft sat perfectly still. He looked at the shocked mayor, the horrified gossip, the crying woman, and the fiercely brave little girl. A slow, knowing smile spread beneath his silver beard. He reached out, picked up the medical affidavit from Josiah Miller, and calmly tossed it directly into the roaring fireplace. Wyatt Cassidy rode his gelding to the brink of collapse, pushing the beast until its chest heaved with white foam. He and Caleb had managed to turn the panicked herd away from the jagged limestone of Dead Man's Draw, losing only 2 calves to the treacherous drop. It was a hard-fought victory, but as Wyatt spurred his exhausted horse down the final stretch toward the broken spur, a cold dread seized his lungs. He saw the sleek black carriage parked in front of the cabin. Throwing himself out of the saddle before the horse even came to a halt, Wyatt hit the dirt running. Caleb scrambled down behind him, pale and clutching his stitched arm. Wyatt threw open the front door, gasping for air, his clothes caked in sweat, mud, and dried blood. "Abby! Judge Croft, I can explain the fence." Wyatt froze. The scene before him made absolutely no sense. Mayor Archibald Higgins and Henrietta Gable were nowhere to be seen. Instead, Judge Hiram Croft was sitting comfortably in Wyatt's favorite armchair, a steaming cup of chicory coffee in one hand and a thick slice of buttered sourdough in the other. Little Sadie was perched happily on the imposing magistrate's knee, playing with his silver pocket watch. Ben and Daisy were on the floor, giggling as Sarah read aloud to them from a worn primer. Sarah was reading, out loud. Abigail stood by the cast-iron stove, her eyes red-rimmed, but her face glowing with a quiet, triumphant peace. "Mr. Cassidy," Judge Croft said, swallowing his bite of bread, "you ride a hard trail." "Where are the mayor and Mrs. Gable?" Wyatt stammered, ripping his hat from his head, utterly bewildered. "I sent them back to town on foot," Judge Croft replied casually. "I decided their carriage was better suited to transport my deputies out to the North Ridge. I suspect they might find a drifter named Billy Jenkins out there, along with some freshly cut wire. Mayor Higgins will have a lot of explaining to do regarding property destruction." Wyatt stared, his mind spinning. "And the petition? The Cheyenne orphanage?" Judge Croft stood up, gently setting Sadie down. He retrieved his leather-bound docket and a fountain pen. "Wyatt, I have ridden this circuit for 30 years. Higgins dragged me out here promising a broken household managed by a hysterical woman. Instead, I found a fiercely intelligent partner, a spotless home, and a little girl who finally found her voice to defend the mother she loves. With a swift, practiced motion, the judge wrote a bold denied across the top of the petition. Your children stay right here. Later that evening, the Wyoming wind died down to a gentle whisper. Wyatt found Abigail standing on the front porch, wrapped in a woolen shawl, staring out at the star-swept prairie. He stepped up behind her, wrapping his heavy arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. We did it, she whispered, leaning into his warmth. You did it, Wyatt corrected softly. When I asked you to marry me, I said it wouldn't be a romantic life. I was a fool, Abigail. He gently turned her around in the moonlight, his dark eyes burning with reverence. I love you. You brought the sun back into this house. Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks as she reached up, framing his rugged face with her hands. I love you too. Wyatt swept her into his arms, kissing her with the desperate, soul-deep claim of a man who had finally found his true home. Decades later, in the historical archives of the Bitter Creek County Courthouse, dated 1928, a sepia-toned photograph of the Cassidy family rests in a glass case. Wyatt is seated in the center, surrounded by 5 prosperous adults. Caleb, foreman of the largest cattle operation in the territory, Sarah, headmistress of the Bitter Creek Academy, Ben, the county sheriff, and the twins, both married to wealthy merchants. Standing proudly behind Wyatt, her hands resting on his shoulders, is Abigail. The town that once called her barren faded into dust, leaving behind the undeniable legacy of a woman who proved them all wrong. The dusty history books of Wyoming rarely remember the loudest voices of Bitter Creek, but they remember the Cassidy family. Abigail never carried a child in her womb, but she carried 5 in her fiercely devoted heart. True motherhood is not born of blood and biology. It is forged in the fires of choice, sacrifice, and an unwavering, stubborn love. She was the greatest mother that rugged frontier ever knew.